Okay, real talk. How many times have you stood in the baking aisle at your grocery store staring at a bag of white sugar in one hand and brown sugar in the other, and thought to yourself, wait, is there actually a difference here? Or am I just paying extra for the fancy-looking one? Look, you're not the only one. Millions of Americans ask this exact question every single week, and honestly, the answer is way more interesting than most people realize. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you. White sugar and brown sugar may look like cousins sitting next to each other on the shelf, but once you understand what's really going on inside those bags, you'll never shop for sugar the same way again. So let's start at the very beginning, because this part genuinely surprised me when I first learned it. Both white sugar and brown sugar come from the exact same plants. Yep, you heard that right. They're either made from sugar cane, those tall green stalks that grow in places like Florida and Louisiana, or from sugar beets, which are actually a root crop grown heavily across states like Minnesota, North Dakota, and Michigan. In fact, according to the USDA, about 55% of sugar produced in the United States comes from sugar beets, and the other 45% comes from sugarcane. So whether you're pouring white or brown into your coffee tomorrow morning, chances are you're sipping something grown right here in America. Now here's where the story gets interesting. When these plants are first processed, the juice that comes out of them is naturally loaded with something called molasses. Molasses is this thick, dark, almost syrupy stuff that has a deep caramel-like flavor and a brownish color. And in its raw, unprocessed form, all sugar actually contains molasses. It's not an additive, it's already in there. What separates white sugar from brown sugar is literally one thing and one thing only. How much of that molasses gets taken out or put back in? White sugar goes through a thorough refining process. The juice gets filtered, boiled down, and spun in these massive centrifuges that basically fling the molasses away from the sugar crystals. What's left behind are those clean, sparkling white crystals you're used to seeing. Pure sucrose, about 99.9% according to food chemistry research, neutral flavor, no frills, just straight-up sweetness. Brown sugar is where things get a little more nuanced, and this part actually blew my mind when I first learned it. Most of the brown sugar sold in American grocery stores today, the big-name brands you see like Domino and CH, isn't actually less processed than white sugar. It's fully refined white sugar that has molasses added back in. Yeah, seriously. The manufacturer takes white sugar, sprays molasses onto it, mixes it up, and boom, that's your brown sugar. There's also a version called unrefined or natural brown sugar, where the molasses is never removed in the first place, but that's less common on most American shelves. So the next time someone tells you brown sugar is more natural, you can politely let them know the truth. Now, let's talk about taste, because this is where you actually feel the difference. White sugar is clean, it's neutral. It sweetens without adding any other personality to what you're making. That's why bakers love it for things like angel food cake, meringues, lemonade, or frostings, anything where you want pure sweetness without changing the color or flavor. Brown sugar, though? Brown sugar has attitude. Because of that molasses, it brings in these warm notes of caramel, toffee, and even a little hint of smokiness depending on how much molasses is in it. That's why it's the secret weapon in recipes like chocolate chip cookies, barbecue sauce, gingerbread, baked beans, and sticky glazes on ham. White sugar sweetens, brown sugar sweetens, and tells a story. And here's something most home cooks never stop to think about. The texture difference actually changes the science of your baking. White sugar is dry, and the crystals flow freely, almost like sand. Brown sugar, on the other hand, is soft, slightly sticky, and clumps together because molasses is naturally hygroscopic, which is just a fancy word for saying it holds onto moisture. That moisture is a huge deal when you're baking. It's the reason why chocolate chip cookies made with brown sugar come out soft and chewy, the kind that bend when you pick them up, while cookies made with mostly white sugar come out thinner and crispier, the kind that snap in half. Food scientists at institutions like the American Chemical Society have explained this for years. The acidity in molasses also reacts with baking soda differently, affecting how the cookie spreads and rises in the oven. So if you've ever wondered why your cookies never came out like grandma's, it might literally come down to which sugar she was using. Now here's where I have to stop and address something really important, because this is probably the biggest myth floating around about sugar in America right now. A lot of people believe brown sugar is somehow healthier than white sugar. You've probably seen the Instagram posts, you've probably heard a friend swear by it, and yeah, technically, brown sugar does contain trace amounts of minerals like calcium, potassium, iron, and magnesium, thanks to the molasses. But here's the reality check. We're talking about seriously tiny amounts. According to the USDA Food Data Central database, 1 teaspoon of brown sugar contains less than 1% of the daily value for any of those minerals. To get a meaningful amount of, say, calcium from brown sugar, you'd have to eat something like a cup or more in a single sitting, and at that point, we're way past any health benefit and straight into territory your dentist and your doctor would not be thrilled about. The American Heart Association recommends that women limit added sugar to about 25 grams per day, or roughly 6 teaspoons, and men to about 36 grams, or 9 teaspoons. Your body, at the end of the day, processes white sugar and brown sugar in almost identical ways. Both raise your blood sugar, both can contribute to weight gain, tooth decay, and increased risk of type 2 diabetes and heart disease when consumed in excess. So please don't fall for the idea that switching from white to brown sugar is some kind of health upgrade. It's not. It's the same game with a slightly different costume, that said. If you're choosing brown sugar for flavor or texture reasons, that's a completely different conversation, and it's a totally valid one. Just know what you're actually getting. Let's also talk about the different types of brown sugar, because this trips up a lot of home cooks. Light brown sugar has less molasses, usually around 3 to 4% by weight, and has a milder caramel flavor. Dark brown sugar has more molasses, usually around 6 to 7%, and it's bolder, stickier, and has a stronger, almost bittersweet edge. Light brown sugar is great for everyday cookies and cakes where you want just a hint of warmth. Dark brown sugar shines in recipes that can handle the bigger flavor, like gingerbread, barbecue sauce, baked beans, or a killer pecan pie. There's also something called muscovado sugar, which is a less refined, almost raw version with even more molasses and a really intense flavor. You won't find it in every grocery store, but if you see it, it's worth trying at least once. Here's another thing that catches a lot of people off guard. Shelf life. White sugar is basically immortal. If you keep it in a cool, dry place in a sealed container, it can last indefinitely. Seriously, the FDA and food safety experts confirm that plain white sugar doesn't really spoil. Brown sugar, though, is a whole different story. Because it contains moisture from the molasses, that moisture slowly evaporates over time, leaving you with what looks like a solid brick of sugar in your pantry. You've probably experienced this. You go to bake cookies, you pull out the brown sugar, and it's basically a rock. Frustrating, right? But here's a simple trick that actually works. Drop a slice of fresh bread or a damp paper towel into the container, seal it up, and leave it overnight. The moisture transfers from the bread into the sugar, and by morning, it's soft again. It's one of those old-school kitchen hacks that's been passed down for generations, and it genuinely works. Now let's talk money for a second, because this matters. White sugar is usually cheaper per pound than brown sugar at most American grocery stores. It's produced on a massive scale, it lasts forever, and it's sold in huge bags. Brown sugar costs a bit more because of the extra processing step of adding molasses back in, and it usually comes in smaller packages. So if you're baking a lot, and especially if you're baking on a budget, buying white sugar in bulk and adding your own molasses when a recipe calls for brown sugar is actually a legit money saver. 1 tablespoon of molasses per cup of white sugar gives you light brown sugar. 2 tablespoons gives you dark. A lot of professional bakers do this exact thing. So which one should you actually use? It really comes down to what you're making and what experience you want. If you want clean, neutral sweetness, something that won't change the color or compete with the flavors in your dish, white sugar is your friend. Think lemonade, iced tea, angel food cake, sugar cookies, meringues and frostings. If you want richness, chewiness, and that warm caramel depth, brown sugar is the move. Think soft chocolate chip cookies, banana bread, gingerbread, oatmeal cookies, barbecue rubs, and sticky sauces. And honestly, a lot of the best recipes use both, because together they give you the best of both worlds, sweetness plus complexity. That's why so many classic American cookie recipes call for a combination. At the end of the day, white sugar and brown sugar might come from the same plants and end up in a lot of the same recipes, but they're really more like siblings with completely different personalities than identical twins. White sugar is the clean-cut, no-nonsense one. Reliable, predictable, and endlessly versatile. Brown sugar is the warmer, moodier one. A little sticky, full of character, and kind of high maintenance when it comes to storage. Neither one is healthier than the other in any real sense, and neither one is better than the other. They're just different tools for different jobs, and once you understand how each one behaves, you stop guessing in the kitchen and start cooking with confidence. And hey, just a quick note, none of what I'm sharing today is medical advice. If you have diabetes, insulin resistance, or any condition that makes sugar a concern, please talk to your doctor or a registered dietitian about what's right for you. Everybody's body is different, and a personalized conversation always beats a YouTube video. If this totally changed the way you think about that bag of sugar in your pantry, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because I break down everyday food science like this every single week. Real research, honest explanations, no miracle claims, no BS, just the kind of stuff that makes you smarter every time you step into your kitchen. Drop a comment and tell me which one you reach for more often, white or brown, and what's the recipe that made you fall in love with it. I read every single comment, and your ideas often turn into future videos. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I'll see you in the next one.